Good morning. Today's date is February 19th, 2025. Today's topic will be the three white races. The racial blend in Europe towards the close of the Andite migrations became generalized in the three white races as follows. Just in case anybody doesn't understand who the Andites are, that's your fallen angels and the mix of the human races at that time. The northern white races, this so-called Nordic race, consisted primarily of the blue man plus the Andite, but was also contained a considerable amount of Andinite blood. Together with smaller amounts of the red and the yellow Sanjak, the northern white races thus encompassed these four most desirable human stocks. But the largest inheritance was from the blue man. The typical early Nordic was long-headed, tall, and blond. But long ago, this race became thoroughly mixed with all the branches of the white people. The primitive culture of Europe, which was encountered by the invading Nordics, was that the retrograding Danubians blended with the blue man. The Nordic Danish and the Danubian Andinite cultures met and mingled on the Rhine, as is witnessed by the existence of two racial groups in Germany today. The Nordics continued to trade in amber from the Baltic coast, building up a great commerce in the broadheads of the Danube Valley via the Brenner Pass. This extended contact with the Danubians led these northerners into mother worship, and for several thousands of years, cremation of the dead was almost universal throughout Scandinavia. This explains why remains of the earlier white races, although buried all over Europe, are not to be found, only their ashes in stone and clay urns. These white men also built dwellings. They never lived in caves. And again, this explains why there are so few evidence of the white man's early culture. Although the preceding Cro-Magnon type is well preserved, where it has been securely sealed up in caves and grottos. As it were, one day in northern Europe there is a primitive culture of the retrogressing Danubians and the blue man, and the next that of a sudden appearing and vastly superior white man. The second is the central white race. While this group includes strains of blue, yellow, and andite, it is predominantly andinite. These people are broad-headed, swarthy, and stocky. They are driven like a wedge between the Nordic and the Mediterranean races, and with the broad base resting in Asia, the apex penetrating eastern France. For almost 20,000 years, the Andinites had been pushed further and farther to the north of Central Asia by the Andites. By 3000 BC, increasing aridity was driving the Andites back into Turkestan. This Andinite push southward continued for over 1,000 years and splitting around the Caspian and Black Seas, penetrating Europe by the way of both the Balkans and the Ukraine. This invasion included the remaining groups of Adamson's descendants, and during the latter half of the invasion period, carried with it considerable numbers of Iranian Andites as well as many of the descendants of the Scythite priests. By 2500 BC, the westward thrust of the Andinites reached Europe, and this overrunning of all Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, and the Danube Basin by the barbarians of the hills of Turkestan constituted the most serious and lasting of all cultural setbacks up to that time. These invaders definitely Andinized the character of the Central European races which have ever since remained characteristically alpine. 3. The southern white races. This brunette Mediterranean race consisted of the blend of the Andite and the Blue Man, with a smaller Andinite strain than in the north. This group also absorbed a considerable amount of secondary Sanjic blood through the Saharans. In later times, this southern division of the white races was infused by strong Andite elements from the eastern Mediterranean. The Mediterranean coastlands did not, however, become cremated by the Andinites until the time of the great nomadic invasions of 2500 BC. Land traffic and trades were nearly suspended during these centuries when the nomads invaded the eastern Mediterranean districts. This interference with land travel brought about the great expansion of sea traffic and trade. Mediterranean seaborne commerce was in full swing about 4,500 years ago, and this development of marine traffic resulted in the sudden expansion of the descendants of the Andites throughout the entire coastal territory of the Mediterranean basin. These racial mixtures laid the foundation for the southern European races, the most highly mixed of all. And since these days, this race has undergone still further admixture, notably with the blue, yellow, Andite peoples of Arabia. This Mediterranean race is, in fact, so freely admixed with the surrounding peoples as to be virtually indiscernible as a separate type, but in general, its members are short, long-headed, and brunette. In the north, the Andites, through warfare and marriage, obliterated the Blue Man, but in the south they survived in greater numbers. The Basque and the Berbers represent the survival of two branches of this race, but even these people have been thoroughly admixed with the Saharans. This was the picture of race mixture presented in Central Europe about 3000 BC. In spite of the partial Adamic default, the higher types did blend. These were the times of the New Stone Age overlapping the oncoming Bronze Age. In Scandinavia, it was the Bronze Age associated with mother worship. In southern France and Spain, it was the New Stone Age associated with sun worship. This was the time of the building of circular and roofless sun temples. The European white races were energetic builders, delighting to set up great stones as tokens to the sun, much as they did their later day descendants of Stonehenge. The vogue of some sun worship indicates that this was a great period of agriculture in southern Europe. The superstitions of this comparatively recent sun worshipping era ever now persists in the folkways of Brittany. Although Christianized for over 1500 years, these Britons still retain charms of the New Stone Age for warding off the evil eye. They still keep thunderstones in the chimney as protection against lightning. The Britons never mingled with the Scandinavian Nordics. They are survivors of the original Andite inhabitants of Western Europe, mixed with the Mediterranean stock. But it is a fallacy to presume to classify the white peoples as Nordic, Alpine, and Mediterranean. There has been altogether too much blending to permit such a grouping. At one time, there was a fairly well-defined division of the white races into such classes, but widespread intermingling has since occurred, and it is no longer possible to identify these distinctions with any clarity. Even in 3000 BC, the ancient social groups were no more of one race than they are the present inhabitants of North America. The European culture for 5,000 years continued to grow and to some extent intermingle, but the barrier of language prevented the full reciprocation of the various Occidental nations. During the past centuries, this culture has been experiencing its best opportunity for blending in the cosmopolitan populations of North America. and the future of that continent will be determined by the equality of the racial factors which are permitted to enter into its present and future populations, as well by the level of social culture which is maintained. And just to add a little tidbit, it says here, so-called white races of Urantia are the descendants of these blue men, as they were first modified by the slight mixture with yellow and red, and as they were later greatly upstepped by the assimilating the greater portion of the violet races. And that's the ending of the white races. Came in 2,500 years ago. Thank you.